If you, like me, watched last week's episode of All About the Song, we talked about NFTs, and it was a lot to take in. And I decided that based on the popularity of the episode, let's do it all again. We have Brian Leung of Treebud Academy on for part 2, talking NFTs. All About the Song is now.
This is All About the Song.
Welcome to the 135th episode of All About the Song. I am your host, Michael McDonnell, and thank you for joining us. On the podcast today, we have Brian Leung of Treebud Academy. Once again, we are continuing our conversation on NFTs. It was, well, to be honest, after we were done the episode, I felt like the same way I was when I was a student in high school. I'd sit at the desk and go, I get it. And then I'd realize 30 minutes later, I have no clue. And so I listened back to the episode, and I had a couple more questions and a couple ideas to kind of be a little bit more specific to how an NFT could help an artist, and also almost to ask some questions again, because it's, I'm a bass player, I'm a podcaster. I don't really know about NFTs. I opened a Wealthsimple account like 3 weeks ago. So I felt like it was important to continue this discussion and get a thorough understanding, or as thorough as we could be, about NFTs. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit subscribe, the notification button. Leave us a comment. If you're listening to audio, rate and subscribe. This podcast has been such a labor of love, and I love doing it, and I hope you do too. So here we are, episode 135 of All About the Song, featuring Brian Leung of Treebud Academy. Welcome to part 2 of our NFT conversation with Brian Leung of Treebud Academy. He was on last week to talk about what is an NFT. So I will tell you, if you've just started listening to this, go back and listen to part 1, because we talk more rudimentary about it. And I think we'll continue to talk in a very rudimentary manner today. But we got a lot of really great reception from the episode we did last week. So I thought, why not continue the conversation instead of waiting for a couple of weeks? So again, welcome back to the podcast, Brian Leung of Treebud Academy.
Hey, Mike. Thank you so much for having me again. And our last conversation was really, really fun. And I had a great time chatting with you about it, nerd out a little bit. But I think today we can focus a bit more on how NFT technology in general can help a musician or an artist flourish and thrive in this kind of new day and age.
Well, I think this is a great place to start, because as I listen back to our podcast, NFTs are so universal at this point. And to narrow it down to an artist, especially one confused in a pandemic about how to move forward, what is it that they're able to do?
We touched upon this a bit last time, and I think it's so exciting to be able to... So first of all, the technology landscape nowadays is so amazing that you can go directly to your fans, your audience, and kind of distribution of your creativity, your art is so easy right now. Mm-hmm. You can reach your audience directly through Instagram Live, with Twitch, with things like Facebook. All these medium is available to an artist and a musician to reach the audience directly. And that one-on-one interaction has never been stronger than now, right? Think about fan interaction back maybe when our parents were growing up. Could be like, calling into the radio show or writing fan mail, right? But nowadays you can go directly to your audience and literally receive messages from them, right? So I think this is kind of the backdrop to everything we're going to be talking about today. With the added layer of using NFTs, and I think that is a way to digitally mark something as unique. And that's sort of the problem we've always been having since the advent of the digital form of media. So, ever since, for example, the Napster days, right? That's a huge kind of pivotal moment in music history and in the industry. That's people are able to share their music in a way that can bypass the traditional distribution means. And now, what is our most common distribution means is like distributing via Spotify or all the other different music streaming platforms out there like Tidal, YouTube Music, Google Play, etc. Actually, Google Play is now YouTube Music, but that's a whole different thing, that rebrand. So it's interesting that in this state of where music can be digitally kind of like homogenous now. How like you can't differentiate one stream from another, right? In the past, you can differentiate one physical copy of your CD with another copy of the CD, right? Or even further back, like the cassette tapes or the MD tapes that Sony put out back in the days. And then even before that, vinyl and cassettes, right? So now with music having gone through a digital distribution kind of stream, it always comes back down to like, okay, how can I make something unique and more special for the consumers, for my audience? And I think NFT is a great way to do it. Like we talked about last time, it's kind of like a digital imprint of saying, this thing is a part of a collection that is separate from something that's mass produced. And I thought about a great analogy. Do you play any online games, or do you play any growing up any video games?
Well, recently I've been watching my friends on Twitch play video games, which is very sad. I don't know if that works. I mean, I played 007 when I was a kid on Nintendo 64. Not that much, though, outside of those.
I think in the... so growing up, I played some RPGs. I played something called an MMORPG, so massively multiplayer online RPG. Okay. I'm a huge nerd, if you can't tell. And there are ways you can kind of customize your character, your avatar online. You can get clothing or equipment or decorate things digitally. That's no more less unique and I guess realistic to a player than having a custom-made sneaker. Right? You put time and effort into modifying and changing how your character looks, that it becomes unique and special. Right. In the same way, I think owning something digitally is going to become more and more common in terms of a concept. And like we talked about, it's already kind of like part of our daily life. Our money example, right? Our money is just kind of stored digitally. Yeah. So yeah, I think using an NFT to make something unique and certifying it as kind of a record or a certificate of authenticity would be an interesting use of NFTs. I thought about this thinking about Alexander Saint. So for example, like, he goes out and reviews a bass or a pedal or whatever. I saw Tao post a pedal, one of the new pedals that he got recently, right?
Yes, so, and just before you begin, I'll also mention Alexander Saint, also known as Alex St. Kitts, is a extraordinary Toronto bass player and artist. He was on the podcast 2 episodes ago, so be sure to check that episode out when you're done. But he's an interesting person because he's branching out into all different facets of music simultaneously and doing well at it.
Yeah, I love the guy. He's super talented and super chilled. I love hanging out with him. And also like amazingly creative and talented, obviously. So imagine like any musician out there, and I think we all aspire to be something recognized, and also to have your arts appreciated. The Imagine going out to get a pedal, get a bass, or get your instrument of choice, right? And you create an NFT saying that, okay, each this instrument that I have, this physical thing, now it's going to be backed up by a digital certificate showing that this is something that I've owned and I've purchased at this time in my career, at this time in my life.
Okay.
Let's fast forward 10 years, 15 years, right? It can be, the instrument's still there. So the physical thing is still there. But if you don't keep a track record or like the sales receipt or whatever, you're not going to be able to, I mean, auction houses and all these things can theoretically like provide that, appraisal or authentication for you. But now you also have this other thing that you own and you created that can help you say, okay, this instrument was owned by me at this point in my career. Now I'm at a completely different point in my career. Maybe, I'm more internationally renowned. I've got more hit singles and albums out, right?
I played this bass on this number one song.
Yep. Or you've been to, you've brought this bass and played at certain, venues. Like Alex went to Madison Square Garden, right? I was like,
absolutely,
twice, right?
and I think he played like his red F bass, and there's photos of him playing it, but to authenticate it as something to the event, to the memory, as we talked about in the last episode, there's value in that.
Yep.
Without having to give someone your bass.
And so there's two things. I think there's added value to, okay, so let's say someone actually wants to buy that bass, right?
Right.
Totally fair. You can do it.
I want to buy that bass.
And hey, Alex, you got a potential buyer here now already. Create that NFT, sell it along with your bass. And now you have that sort of digital certificate saying, oh, this transaction happened. And you can trace it back to when Alex first bought the bass, or, maybe he can add little like milestone markers in this chain of data and say, oh, I played using this bass on this date with, at this venue for this song and for this artist, right? So now all that history of that bass and its interactions with like the public, with him, etc., and other musicians of note, no pun intended, is now transferred to you now, right? And let's say years down the road, another interested party approaches you and say, oh, I want to buy that bass that Alex used at on that tour with Justin Timberlake, for example. And then you're like, oh yeah, I have it. And I can prove to you that this is the exact same model and the exact same one. Here's a serial number, and this is the NFT associated with its history. Right? Instead of you going out and getting like a piece of paper, which theoretically can be forged, et cetera, now there's a digital thing that is kind of irreplaceable and has the entire history open to the public and can be verified digitally.
How do you make an NFT? Is there a website that you go to? Is that develops it? And what does it kind of look like?
So let's take a step back. I think NFT, and we've talked about this briefly before, but the technology is built on something called a blockchain, and it's blocks of data linked up in a chain. So it's called blockchain. And the most common platform to store this data is a cryptocurrency called Ethereum. Okay. And so you can imagine the currency and the transactions using that currency is recorded on a blockchain. But kind of layered on top of that, you can build anything on top of that sort of train. So you can imagine, a train, like an actual train, and if you double deck it, if it's a double decker train, whatever happens on the first deck can be separate from the second deck, right? So it's kind of using the blockchain of Ethereum, all their transactions, to log and kind of tag a second layer of data. And the second layer of data and third layer, et cetera, all these other layers can be completely different things. So I talked about crypto kitties on my podcast, and it's this idea of, breeding and trading kitties, like digital kittens, with their like genetic material based on kind of logged onto the blockchain for Ethereum.
Okay.
And I saw you gave a look about the crypto kitties. I think it's exactly the same concept as Beanie Babies.
Yeah, or Tamagotchi almost. Or, well, I guess
Yeah.
like Tamagotchi was like you were like raising the pet per se.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe even as I was thinking about this is the thing that I'm starting to kind of get fixated on. So let's say we finish this episode. It's edited, good to go, just like the one we did last week. It's on YouTube. It's an entity. It's a 1 hour podcast. And let's say you and I decide to make that 1 hour podcast an NFT.
Mm-hmm.
So just me sitting here at my desk, got the file, what would I do?
There are websites out there that kind of is kind of like a platform or like a minting process of creating these tokens for you. And it's just like any other transaction-based platform where you go in, you fill in the information, you pay the fees for that broker, and they create it for you.
Okay.
And now it exists out there as an NFT based on the Ethereum network.
And do you get like an email confirmation? I know this maybe is like so basic.
Yeah, it's all kind of stored in digitally in your, it could be your wallet, it could be in your, so like you first have to open up there's one in particular, I can't remember, Raribles.
Okay.
Is I think one of the most talked about one. I don't know if it's the biggest one or the most popular one to use, but I think for Raribles you have to kind of open up a cryptocurrency account, so you have your wallet there, and then buy one or like make one transaction of an Ethereum, or it could be a part of Ethereum coin. I don't remember. And then once you make that transaction, you can then kind of piggyback any type of information onto that transaction, and it can be creating for Blue Bones like their album. It could be that certificate of authentication for that space that you're planning to buy off of Alex.
Right. And so basically what I could do is I could take every music video that I own or every song that I own and make an NFT.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be done. And so all of a sudden, let's say I have 10 NFTs. I've got 10 songs, 10 NFTs. That doesn't mean anyone's going to listen to it. Like it still goes on Spotify. It still goes on the digital streaming platforms. I could make a CD of it. I could make a vinyl record. I also have this NFT, and it's more about the ownership of it and the value as a memorabilia item that could grow based on the success of the artist.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I think at this point we talked about this, like the Austin Matthews example that you gave last time. Like, at this point in time, to kind of encourage those transactions, I think artists needs to provide some sort of value add. So like, how is it different than listening to it on Spotify? How is it different than to, purchasing it digitally via iTunes or whatever, right? Or the Apple Music Store, I think it's called now.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about in terms of ways that may work, and let me know if this would be like the right thing or the wrong thing, but let's say you're a new artist and the origins of this idea where the Police played this big show before Roxanne came out in Toronto. It was at the Horseshoe Tavern, and there were 16 people there. And it's become this legendary story because there are about 600 people that claim that they were one of 16 that were there. And because, I think it was like a couple weeks later, they became one of the biggest bands in the world.
Wow.
So I've even been to concerts where Sting has talked about that show on, the arena stage saying, and everyone claps and he makes a joke like, oh, you weren't there. What if a new artist playing a show or playing some sort of event that like a EP release show, first show, something of something momentous. Is that the word? Just something big. Instead of having like a ticket stub that you would hold on to, so that one day the artist is, this big, huge artist, and you have this token of being at the first show. You could make the concert tickets to the show an NFT, and as the artist grows, there's like an increased value.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just like like you said, like memorabilia, anything that you collect.
Yeah.
Now instead of it's being physical, it's in a digital form. You can trade it, you can transact with it, just as you would with any, like literally a sock that belongs to a basketball player, for example, can theoretically have value.
Yeah.
To the owner, to some people, it may not have any value. Like if you ask me, do I want a sock from like LeBron James? Like, no, that's disgusting. That's stupid. But there are people who are fans of LeBron James who would be like, oh yeah, that would be cool. I'll frame it up and put it on the wall.
I think there would be thousands of fans. And I went to a Beatles convention in Toronto where some of the biggest, they have the Wurlitzer from Strawberry Fields, the song. That was really cool to see. They also had a patch of dirt from George Harrison's childhood backyard with a certificate of authenticity to say that in fact was. They also had a water bottle with the name Paul on the top in a glass case. And, this was a convention that thousands of people went to. And I walked away being like, I looked at a patch of dirt and a couple of water bottles and a couple of Kleenexes that they used. But there was this value because it's Paul McCartney and George Harrison.
Exactly.
So I guess an NFT for a new artist of that stature could draw a digital audience and a currency that could grow. And as we discussed last episode, the artist could continue to make royalties because the way that they've set up their blockchain, they could continue to make money as this digital item passes hands.
For sure.
No different than when with Beatles memorabilia, merchandise that get passed along through, affluent people that look to collect things. When John Lennon has some sort of anniversary of his, would have been his 80th birthday, or it's the 40th anniversary of his death. All of a sudden, all this memorabilia goes up in value because it's topical. Same thing for an NFT. It's just not a physical item, but the market will peak and it'll have its peak and valleys no different than anything else.
Yeah, for sure. And I spoke briefly about this last time, literally maybe just one sentence about it. Something is only as valuable as what the next person is willing to pay for it, right? Like theoretically, I have a lot of Apple products. So theoretically, this MacBook Pro here is worthless. Right. There's some intrinsic value in terms of like the material, but if I throw it in the garbage can the next day, it's, we'll talk about e-waste, but that's a whole different topic. But if no one's willing to pay any money for this MacBook Pro, then this MacBook Pro is useless.
Right.
I'll have to scrap it and get money for, for example, the materials, right? Same thing with an NFT. Like if you create an NFT and no one's willing to pay for it, it's useless. But it's also backed by that transaction of you purchasing one ETH, or a portion of an Ethereum coin. And So you can sell that Ethereum coin. So there's some value there and transact with it. But at the end of the day, if no one wants to buy something, then there's no value in it. There's no
Okay.
market for it, right?
So, okay, here's one question. So if it's attached to a coin or like Ethereum, for example, let's say I buy, you make an NFT and I buy it for one Ethereum coin, which is a Canadian dollar or American dollar value at the point in when we purchased it, basically. If all of a sudden Ethereum goes wildly crazy and that thing that I bought from you at one Ethereum coin, which was worth $1 Canadian, is now worth $1,000 Canadian, did the value of what you sold me increase by what the current value of that Coinbase is?
I mean, it depends on how you set it up. You can have it tied directly to that initial thing. And to be honest, like I don't know. I don't know if there will be a future technology that does this where it ties, the NFT to your original transaction. So it's like it's this one coin or a portion of a coin that's attached to this NFT, and it can increase in value based on that coin, like you said. At this point in time, I don't know, because it all depends on how you set it up and what brokerage you use to set this up, right?
Okay. So
like, for example, I think a very analog example is like, let's say you mint a disc, like a CD.
Yeah.
So you print it on a regular CD versus you print it on a gold CD. Right? It depends on how you set it up.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Or doesn't make sense, but I understand what you're getting at. So to bring it back to the artist, let's say Alexander Saint. So you're talking to Alexander Saint. He's going to release another fantastic song. We're looking at, and as we talked about in the last episode, the convergences of new technologies. What would you say to Alexander Saint releasing a song to maximize his artistry in 2021 based on the fact that he can't play live shows, that he can use all the streaming services, there are unlimited mediums available? But what could he do to set himself apart and perhaps monetize his music in a different way?
So I spoke to him briefly about this. We chat periodically. I won't say regularly, but we chat on the phone about marketing and sort of bounce ideas just like this with each other. One thing I talked to him about is, and I also talked to you about this as well. Our very first conversation was about using the different social media platforms to help people discover you. Right. So, for example, using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., and to some extent using YouTube to help people discover your music and reach an audience you won't normally have been able to tap into. Right. So, reaching new audiences using these platforms, and then kind of sort of all these things in the periphery, linking back into your main hub, which I recommended to be your own website. So you carve your own space out of digital cyberspace and own it. And this plot of real estate on the internet now is yours. And you're driving people to this plot of land so that you can monetize that attention. How do you monetize it? It could be through subscription, through so right now he's doing Patreon and also master classes. It's a way to kind of dip into both sides of his talent, where he has his as a solo artist and musician with his own songwriting, songs, etc., and his sort of expertise in being a bass player. So he's tapping into both sides and sort of using digital media to reach new audience and get their attention to drive back into sort of a stable way to make income in this in the pandemic times. I think another interesting way to monetize is a lot of people are interested in the journey, the kind of behind the scenes type of scenario. And I think with live streaming, Twitch, and Instagram Live, etc., all of these are really interesting ways to interact with your audience and your fans. And I think not enough people are taking advantage of this to have that kind of new experience. So, for example, let's use an NFT. Like, let's say I'm an artist and I'm a musician. I want to do a live stream of me, like maybe just jamming out or writing new chords, right? Whatever that may be, or like the genesis of a new song. Join me for 45 minutes. We'll just do 45 minutes of me just interacting, talking to you, and maybe mixing a new song, right? Along with this, the first 100 people to sign up for this session, well, it's free, but the first 100 people can, on top of joining this session, can pay a little bit extra to buy this NFT that I minted for this session. So if this song goes big in the future, these people can have an NFT tied to this point in time saying, oh, I was there when he was starting to work on this song. How cool would that be?
Yeah, it would be really cool also to capture, because I love this in like classic albums or something, where they make this like chord change, and 30 years later you know this song and you've heard it your whole life and it's so important, and you know that change and you wait for it while you're listening to it in the car. But to encapsulate that moment where they have that quirk on their smile and they go, I don't know what I think about it, and have that narrative of someone not understanding that this moment, this little thing changed their life forever. I mean, I love that type of stuff.
And I remember reading about how Queen wrote and recorded Bohemian Rhapsody, where back in those days you're only allowed 8-track or whatever, and they had to kind of mix and master 8 and then do another 8 for the 16 tracks that they had on that song. And it was fascinating to learn about the technical aspect and kind of their journey in terms of overcoming their the technology that limited them back then.
Yeah.
And the creativity. Now imagine if you were there sitting with Freddie and the team to kind of what if we did this? Imagine having that moment recorded and minted as you can own this piece of dirt, certified dirt.
Yeah.
Of this song, right? Of where this song was birthed, basically.
Honestly, I think I would want that. Weirdly, yeah, I think that actually would have a lot of value to me to have a moment, because I love that. Even when I listen to radio shows, when it goes to station breaks, I'd love to own or know what they're talking about off mic, and to just have that, even if it was just banter. I think that there would just be, for me, I would find a lot of value in that. And so
and it doesn't necessarily have to be something expensive or something over the top, millions of dollars to own this one thing, or it takes millions of dollars to make that transaction.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's interesting there will always be a market for so coming from a startup mentality, there are things that people don't know they need until you tell them or you create it for them. So in marketing, there's 2 ways to get demand. So there's inherent demand in the market for something, or you can create demand for something where it's a completely new, product category. For example, smartphones didn't exist in this form before the iPhone came out, right? Smartphones had that, I had one, actually my dad had one and I kind of stole it.
Me too.
like the Palm Pilots, right? And the PDAs, right? That was what a smartphone was. And it was clunky to use until like this thing that revolutionized how people interacted with that type of technology.
Right.
In this case, like there is a market for people like you that want to have or be connected with these important moments of music, or these interesting moments of music, right? And I always tell people, like, cater to people like you, because
Right.
chances are in 7 billion people, there will definitely be a group of people that are just exactly like you, where they'll be interested in the things you're interested in. But now it becomes a question of whether you can monetize it well enough to make a living.
Right.
So it then becomes a pricing strategy and a value question.
And I mean, that's a whole frontier on its own. But I think that as we were talking about these NFTs and the behind the scenes moments that you could capture, and how I even feel excited about that, I also realized that one of the reasons why I feel excited about that was the reason why I started this podcast, was the conversations and all of the moments that I had with other musicians that did not translate onto a stage. The green room conversations, the camaraderie when everyone left, packing up gear, meeting people at sound check. Those were the moments and the feelings and the stories that always wanted me to keep playing music, because I didn't want to lose that part of my life, because I found so much value in it. And it was, my mom told me this great thing about classes, or at school, in high school, that she never remembered anything that she learned in her classes. The things that she remembered were those moments in between where she would talk to her friends. And looking back on high school, it's the same thing for me. I can't tell you what I learned on, this day 10, 15 years ago in history class, but I'm still laughing at that interaction I had with someone. And NFTs, I guess I'm starting to understand the value and how I would value it and how it would mean something to me.
Yeah, I think this has been the most exciting time for. I know it's been hard for a lot of musicians and artists out there. I'm actually working with like a Toronto-based gallery, and as a gallery goes, you can't do anything indoors nowadays. So it's kind of like, how do you pivot, et cetera, et cetera. I know it's been hard, but I also want everyone to understand how exciting all of this is. Where's my iPad? We have something that's this thin that can produce music, right? You can take this anywhere with you. You can, and it has enough processing power for you to go and express yourself. And in this little thin piece of metal, you can have all the tools you need to reach your audience, to create the music or the art that you love, and distribute it in a way that's no one is able to for the past 100 years, right? You can reach your audience directly. They can purchase it instantaneously from you. I think if we're able to focus on how amazing all these tools around us are, and it has kind of unlocked all this potential, this is the time to, like, because we have all this time, to kind of step into a new frontier and sort of imagine and try to create a new way to distribute your art, your music, right?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for concluding our conversation. I'm sure we're going to do this again as new digital mediums and new ways to express yourself as an artist and potentially monetize it come to be. Tell us briefly about Treebud Academy.
So I started Treebud Academy because I want to use my experience and knowledge and what I see in sort of like the tech and business world to help small business owners. And I think nowadays, every musician is kind of treated like an entrepreneur. You have to understand your accounting. You have to understand how you manage your money, the finances. You have to understand how to distribute your arts and kind of get your income. With all this technology available to you, you also have all these responsibilities to use this technology and all these tools to manage your business, right? I think it's important to share my knowledge, and I've been very blessed and very fortunate in the past year, and throughout my career, actually, for that matter. So many people have helped me out in my career to kind of get me to where I am right now. So I wanted to take all this knowledge that's inside my head and just kind of share it with the world, and that's why it's called an academy, because I want people to learn and improve and grow through the information and that I share. I try to do it in an entertaining way. I try to get people that I know who are experts in their field to come in, because God knows I'm not I'm only good at one thing. I'm only good at advertising. So I bring in some of my friends. We talk about different aspects about owning your business and running your business. So check it out if you're interested, and if you think my personality is agreeable enough to watch.
Well, I watched all the episodes. It's very interesting, and I would also say to all the musicians out there, it's a difficult time in the sense of you work on all this art, and then it's like, well, how do you get your art out? How do you get the most eyeballs or most ears listening or watching what you do? Brian's YouTube channel has been fantastic to just learn new things. You're so busy learning how to perform and compose and articulate yourself. Use Brian as a utility to figure out those other things. It enhances the left side of your brain, the logic side of your brain, while you're able to continue to be creative. Brian, thank you again for being on the podcast. And what's next for you?
So right now I'm kind of in between. So I have my consulting business, which I'm very fortunate to have a lot of big clients that kind of keep my expenses paid. But I'm also kind of working on a tech tool that can help anyone create and run their ads and ad campaigns like super easily, super automated. It's kind of like literally tell us, fill out a form, tell us your business, and then within 48 hours, we spit out an entire ad campaign for you and run the ads for you. So including the ads, right? So it's kind of like you don't have to go into Canva anymore to try to okay, let's pull this image in here, change the fonts here, put a color overlay. All of that is done for you automatically. And the setup is done for you automatically as well. So that I'm really interested about. And that's kind of still in a stealth mode. We're going to be launching soon, but I've been saying that for the past month. So who knows?
Excellent. Thanks again, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank Brian for being on the podcast. Please be sure to go to his YouTube channel, Treebud Academy, and subscribe. Hit that notification button too. He has a really great podcast that just came out on blockchains to even further this conversation. I hope if you're an artist or if you have an idea for an NFT that this was helpful and that you learned something, and maybe this was a way to look at NFTs differently or to, develop your angle on how to develop your digital fingerprint. Be sure, if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe to the Sounds Like Songs Network. If you are listening on audio, please rate and subscribe. We are at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, we are there. For questions, comments, suggestions for a guest that you'd like to hear on the podcast, send us an email, allaboutthesongpodcast@gmail.com, and our website for past episodes is www.allaboutthesongpodcast.com. So for Brian, Leung of Treebud Academy, I am Michael McDonnell, Episode 135 is in the books. We'll see you next week.